Hello, my name is Dan Miller, and we're here today at the Shale farm up in Owen County. We were here today, hosted our weaning workshop, and had about 20 producers from across Kentucky come up. My name is Dan Miller, and we're here today at the Shale farm up in Owen County. We were here today, hosted our weaning workshop. So we're here today at Shale, and I've got with me a troubled tablecloth. But I've got some extension specialists and some industry professionals with us that helped us with that workshop, and wanted to give them a chance today to just kind of talk about their high points and kind of the take-home message of the weaning workshop of what producers got here today. So if you weren't able to attend, you can kind of get an idea of what we went over here at the farm today. So first off, I want to introduce Dr. Steve Higgins with UK to go over the kind of environmental facilities part of the discussion. So Dr. Higgins, if you just give us a synopsis of what you went over today.
So my talk was on just designing the facilities to facilitate the animal growth. So location of waters, location of feeding elements, how to streamline as far as how to do the feeding, creating good ventilation, really just creating simplicity and reducing the drudgery on not only the producer but also on the cattle. We also looked at some flooring systems so that they didn't pug and create a lot of mud. We had some weaning outside, so we looked at some shade structures for providing some shade for animals that were on a dry lot, confined in a dry lot.
Next we have Brent Toll with Bo-Ringel Ingelheim, and he helped us with the Chute side portion of the program. Brent, tell us just a little bit about the points that we discussed there Chute side today.
Well, thanks, Dan. You know, the things we were able to do today, one of them was just to talk with people about the stress that are in cattle when we start looking at the animal health side of keeping these cattle healthy. One of the greatest things we got to do after that was actually work about 30 head. And basically I did the first one, and then we walked each producer through how to vaccinate the calf properly, sub-Q, how to deworm that calf properly, proper handling of the vaccines, which is in this business is huge. I think people take that for granted every day. How do we handle these pharmaceutical products and make sure that our money is well spent and the calf gets the benefit of what we bought? With that, then we took it in here, had a question answering session I thought was great, you know, just answering their specific questions for their specific herds and building some plans for them.
And lastly, we've got Dr. Lim Cooler that went over the nutrition part of the program and helped the producers go through a feeding ration. They'll be fed to our animals for the next 30 days. So Dr. Lim Cooler, tell us a little bit about the feeding rations and considerations to make when weaning calves.
Well, thank you, Dan. And so we've got a great opportunity here to look at some different nutritional options. And so we've got 4 different feeding programs that we'll wind up following through for the next 4 weeks. One of them is more of our typical commodity blend, a 3-way blend of a third corn, soy hulls, and corn gluten feed. And then we've got an oat blend that's bringing in a little bit more oats than what most folks would typically see. Oats are a nice ingredient for our quote-unquote weaning and creep rations because they've got the husk on them, provides a little bit of fiber, and then they're a little higher in protein than corn. The other thing is they have a slower rate of fermentation than what corn does, and so it reduces our risk to founder and calves. We also did a ration that would be more in lines with what we would think of a stress feed to have, a lot higher cottonseed hull level. That ration has about 20% cottonseed hulls in it. The nice thing with cottonseed hulls is they're a way to get fiber into a bag, and that's one of the challenges when we think about some of our grains. During this weaning process, I can't control how much a calf is going to eat when I put feed out in a bunk, and so cottonseed hulls can be a way to reduce that risk of acidosis or founder in a calf as well. And then the heifers, Greg and Dan and everybody here will follow those through about 5 to 7 days in the dry lot. Then they'll go out on pasture and get a little bit of 3-way as well. And so we've got 4 kind of different systems on the nutritional side that we'll follow through and report back on the October date for the open house coming up here in 4 weeks.
Now, if anybody has any questions online, please feel free to submit those, and we'd be glad to cover them. But real quick, Dr. Higgins, talk to us a little bit about, I know there's a lot of factors determining the production of the calves when we're weaning and the stress that they're exposed to. Talk to me a little bit about the importance of the access to clean water and having those shade structures that we have out there available for those calves.
So we did this weaning study a couple years ago, and when we were out here, it was like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It was about 89 degrees, and I actually had an infrared temperature gun and shot the temperature gun underneath the shade structures, and actually came back with 89 degrees, which is the same temperature as what was the air temperature. But I also shot the gravel that was in the lot that the animals would be exposed to if they weren't underneath that shade, and it was running 116. And we actually have a table in engineering that shows you, like, if you get up above 120, then that surface is actually dangerous for that animal. And you could run into things like pneumonia, and you could have some mortalities and whatnot, and that's just not good for growth promotion. So by having those shade structures, you got to consider how much space does each animal need. The shade structure needs to be designed so it provides that relief because it's elevated off the ground. You're taking advantage of prevailing wind. You got enough space for the animal. It's on a heavy traffic pad. You got to orient it in the right direction to take advantage of the sun moving across the horizon. And you also use materials that don't radiate heat back onto the animal. So those are just some things you can do to reduce the relief of that heat. But then that clean water is another component that they need to have. So it's normally traditionally, it's a gallon per 100 pounds, and so 500-pound animal, 5 gallons. But the accessibility of having that water so that those animals, under a stressful situation after being weaned, have plenty of access, that they're not creating any kind of aggressive behavior to get to it. They're not having to wait in line like you would at hardware stores, grocery stores, banks, whatever. It's a queuing thing where they need to have access to it. So that if they got the clean water and they got the forages that they need or the feed ration that they need, you're just reducing the stress and you can reach that optimum potential of that animal.
Dr. Higgins, on the water collection system this year, I mean, we had a really good year for rain this year. Roughly how many gallons of water do you think were collected this year off of that rain collection system, or typical would collect?
So I don't think we've ever really looked at this particular system as far as how much water we're collecting, but on average, I mean, Kentucky gets around 48 to 50 inches of rain a year. So that's what you look at. You look at a square foot, and it's going to get 48 inches of rain. And so then that's 4 feet, and that's 7.5 gallons per foot. So you're looking at 30 gallons right there just off of 1 square foot of roof area. And then you can do the math on that and divide it by 12 and whatnot and come up with how many gallons per square foot you get. But we've got a system up here that's designed to collect 12,000 gallons of water. And it's basically sized based on the herd size, how much water they're going to drink. And you got to figure out, I mean, how much an animal's going to drink is going to vary with space and time. So if there's plenty of dew on the forages, if they're out in the field, then they're harvesting their own water. But if it's a hot day, 95, been 95 for 4 days, then they'll probably come up to a water consume 30, 40 gallons or 2 or 3 times what their normal rate is. So the water harvesting system that we have is great because we're essentially harvesting clean water off the roof. Once you put in the infrastructure, essentially it's free water. And we actually looked at the water rates for this particular area. So it's gone up 274% since 2007. So there's probably, I think, been 10 rate increases, and that's only going to increase. For the most part, water's very cheap, but when you look at how much water you could be wasting from leaking waters and draining and cleaning waters, which should be done as a normal practice, then you can actually ramp that up quite a bit. So I think our system's pretty interesting as far as reducing inputs.
Well, Brent, I know I did the Chute side portion with you today up at the barn, and I know kind of the point that I heard you drive home was safe vaccinations handling, and, you know, that we've got a lot of money wrapped up in these pharmaceuticals, and how can we preserve that and make sure that it gets used correctly in the calf. So can you talk just a minute about those details and how we need to handle those safely to make sure that we get the most for our buck?
Again, thanks, Dan. You know, folks, one of the things we take for granted is, you know, we tell our kids when they get in the car, don't text and drive. You heard me today and everybody laughed, but it's so true. You know, put your cell phone up when you're working cattle. The most important thing when we're working those cattle is, number one, your safety, but number two, that calf's safety. And you must remember, we're dealing with needles and we're dealing with pharmaceutical products. These pharmaceutical products, no matter what anybody thinks, are not human friendly if they enter our body at all. Cause major rashes, cause trouble, even up to death with some antibiotics that are on the market. So the big thing I want to drive home is, number one, safety for the calf, safety for the human being. Number two, proper handling. You know, how do we handle these products? When we go to the feed store, we go to our veterinarian, we need to have a cooler with us. If we're buying vaccines that are stored at 55, 60 degrees, most of those we want stored a little cooler than that, but darn sure over freezing in that 45, 55, 60 degree area. We want to keep a constant temperature on them. We want to take them out of that cooler, whether at the vet office or the feed store. We want to get them into another cooler with ice packs. We want to get them chute side, particularly if we're dealing with a modified live. We want to keep them out of sunlight. We want to keep them in that cooler. If we need to use repeater syringes, we showed them how to do that today. If we just have disposable syringes, that's fine. But we always want to keep those vaccines in that cooler. If we have to keep going back to it, that's just part of it, to keep those vaccines at a constant temperature so the animal actually gets what we bought for that animal to get.
I got a quick question, Mark. So yeah, you can teach an old dog new tricks. So one of the things I found interesting was that some products now have a mechanism to let you know when they're no longer useful or good. And so could you explain what you shared with the group about how do you tell if a vaccine is no longer good to use?
Sure. Very fortunate, and throw a plug for BI that we've came a long way in technology and vaccines and in dewormers, but the triangle vaccine that's on the market today is not the same vaccine that we had 10 years ago. In fact, it's barely the same that we had 4 years ago. We have better adjuvants. We have better mechanisms, as we're talking about. One of those is when you're using a killed vaccine. This actually happened to me. I told the group, we have a habit of buying the 50-dose bottle. We're going to work 10 calves a day. We work those 10 calves. We've kept it cool. We put it back in the refrigerator. I come back a month later. I want to work them again. We look in the refrigerator. We grab it. Well, is that vaccine good? Well, nobody can really answer that question until now. With BI and Triangle, we actually have a pink mechanism that once the vaccine turns black, it's time to get rid of it. And I thought that was the great idea, because most producers, just like me, you go to that refrigerator and honestly, you forgot when you bought the product. You look at the expiration date, or you used to, and you're like, okay, it's still in date, but is the product still good? We got to remember, every time we enter that bottle with that needle and then into that calf and back into that bottle, we're dragging that bacteria back into that bottle. So how much can that product sustain that we can still use again? So with us, we're fortunate we've got a product that's got an indicator in it that if that vaccine goes black, we need to get rid of it.
Last question for you, Dr. Lemcooler. I know today, nutrition-wise, we've got some bagged feed and basic commodity feeds along with free choice hay. But a lot of producers are going to put up their own silage and incorporate that into their rations. Talk to us a little bit about how you would get calves onto that and your recommendations using silage incorporated with that ration.
That's a good question, Dan, and actually came up today thinking about baleage, for example, and some folks are doing baleage, and I know that the farm here, you all are doing some baleage as well. So what my recommendation is when we think about fermented feeds, whether it be corn silage or haylage, is that we need to think about waiting at least 3 or 4 days. Let these calves get over the stress of being separated from their dams, let them get on a feed that they're going to find palatable, and not introduce something different like a fermented feed that has a different odor, a different taste. So I usually would tell folks to wait about 3 to 4 days, let them get acclimated to being separated for the dam. And then as you begin introducing the forage that's fermented, one thing that's really important is try to introduce only enough that they'll clean up in about a day. The longer that it sets out, it begins a secondary fermentation and it goes through a heat. And as it goes through that heat, the quality is actually degrading. And so we want to make sure we get it used up within 24 hours. If that means after the first 24 hours and you still have partial bale of haylage left, think about a way to get that back out to the cow herd or something like that and put out another fresh bale. And then the calves will take anywhere from 3 to 7 days to fully acclimate to silage, whether that be corn silage or baleage. But after about a week's time, they'll be found it desirable, found it palatable, and really in high quality forages, which I have to give a plug for Eden Shale. They do a great job. As an example, second cutting fescue hay that's in these pens this year was 15% protein and 56% TDN, which is almost double the protein that I see in fescue hay coming across my desk, and about 15% higher in energy. So kudos to you all, and that's the type of hay that we want during weaning. leafy hay that's high in nutrients so that when that calf takes a bite, it's getting what it needs. But in about a week, they'll be rolling on the silage, whether corn silage or haylage, and they won't go backwards.
Well, thank you to all three of you gentlemen. Appreciate your time, not only today, but to do this session and answer some questions. Would like to extend the invitation to everyone to attend our open house October 13th here at the farm. That will start at 10 a.m. with registration at 9 a.m. We'll do a tour of the farm, see some new infrastructure that we put in this past year, and then also give you the results of our weaning workshop here after we weigh these calves after 30 days on this ration. So we'll have that results and wrap up for that. If you would, please RSVP to that event. It is free, but we would like to be able to make sure we have enough lunch. You can email us at kbn@kykattle.org or call the office at 859-278-0899. And again, we thank you and have a good